Chapter 18 starts a new sort of section. Some people say that 16 and 17 is the long short way, and that 18 through 25 is the short long way. Even though it's a reversal that the long short way gets 2 chapters and the short long way gets 7 chapters. Whatever it is. What is chapter 18 about? Chapter 18 starts something else because we're still on this whole track of figuring out who we are, figuring out how we function, figuring out what happens one side or the other. We did all the technical stuff. Now we're looking at it much more what happens to everything in practice. We had one level that we went through this whole thing with the Avat Tfuna, this intellectual kind of love, following the program, and the Nefesh Elokis is winning over the Nefesh Bahamas, but I'm not feeling it. It's not materializing deep in my heart. So I have more of an intellectual love toward God, as in I have the right attitude toward Torah and Mitzvot. I'm so with it, I'm so in it, but I'm not really feeling it with the deep conviction in my heart. It's not materializing there. Well, what am I doing wrong? And the Alter Rebbe is like, don't worry, that's okay. The God connects a good thought and the deed together. As in, he's going to give you the wings for the mitzvah that you've done. Now, we're going to turn to the foundational verse of Tanya, and that's Kikar v'achadavar ma'od b'fichol v'vavcha lasoso. The Alter Rebbe is going to emphasize ma'od. What does it mean that it's very close? Not just that it's close, but it's very close. Emphasis important, that it's very close. As in this love, the sphere of God, doing action and stuff like that, this is very close to you. We have a basic question. It can be very close to if I sit deep, long meditation and stuff like that, then eventually it will be close to me because I'll have reached the intellectual point of it being close to me. But at the end of the day, what if meditation is not very near for everybody? As in, you could tell them that I will have a complete love and fear of God, etc., with deep intellectual contemplation, meditation, spending a lot of hours focusing on God. Not meditation clearing the mind, meditation focusing the mind on a single thing, God. If I think about God long enough, I'll develop feelings toward God. That's kind of the idea that goes all the way back to chapter 3. What if it's not applicable? I might not be able to sit and meditate for hours at a time. I might not have the intellectual capacity to meditate for hours at a time. There are some people who, intellectual types and academic types, that they might be very into sitting and focusing on one subject. And there are some people who they just don't have it in them. They were made with other strengths. They're made with other capacities. And meditation is not one of them. So how can you say that, if you meditate long enough, this love and fear of God is going to be very near to you? And it's not just that, but you need knowledge for meditation. How can I sit and focus on God without a knowledge of God? So what if someone is brought up, either through intentionally or not, without the knowledge needed for meditation? For whatever reason, they never got the right kind of schooling. It could be anything. Someone could have not gotten the right schooling because they grew up in communist Russia. Or it's not just because parents didn't send to Hebrew school or whatever it is. What about that? And what about someone's background? What if they have to go to work at 14 or whatever it is? There's so many factors at play here. What do you mean everyone can just sit and meditate? Not everybody can do that. Some people work 14-hour shifts and they have 12 kids to take care of at home. Sitting and meditating on the greatness of God, it's not because of lack of wanting. There's not an option for it. What are we supposed to do about that? How am I supposed to develop this love of God? Not just that, how can you say that this love of God, a relationship with God and connecting with God is very near to me when I can't do this, the meditative process? I can't engage in what needs to be done to get there. Or I might not have the capacities to do that. Emphasis is on very. No, it's near to you. No, it's very near to you. In this chapter, this is what the Alter Rebbe introduces to us now. It's something that he calls the Ava Misateris, a hidden love. He says, within each of us, we have, you could call it the pilot light. We have a pilot light of love/fear of God. It's part of us down to our DNA. Why is that? Because it's an inheritance from our forefathers. Why is that important? By the way, specifying the word inheritance. You don't have to do anything to gain an inheritance, but be born with the right name, or DNA, I guess you could say. A person doesn't earn wages or salary without having worked for it. A person doesn't receive a gift without somehow earning it, or there has to be some sort of relationship for the gift to occur. There's no expectation on either side. But inheritance, all you have to do is be born into the family and you could be part of the inheritance. There's nothing that you actively have to do to gain it. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that this Ava Misateris, this hidden love, this pilot light of love, the little flame of love deep down inside of us, this is inheritance we get from the Avos, for the forefathers. What do you mean that it's part of our DNA? It's part of the DNA of the Jewish people to have this Ava Misateris, this hidden love. Deep inside of us, there's something for God that we feel, if we only know how to access it. The reason is because the Avos, ki Avos hein a Merkava, because they were a Merkava for Hashem. A Merkava, a chariot has no will but the will of its driver. A chariot doesn't choose directions. The car doesn't just go. You have to drive the car. So the Avos, they were like a chariot. God said, go here, and that's where they went. They were not independent drivers, which just goes to show that how many thousands of years later is it? Still invoking the Avos, and we're still talking about the Avos. They're not great people in between. Yes, there were. Obviously there were. But it just shows how deep and how far-reaching what the Avos were and what the Avos did. We're not talking about regular people. They were great men. They were wealthy men. They were influential men. And yet even with all that, they were just a chariot when it came to God. Right? When it came to something that was higher than them, they were just totally subservient to it. This love and devotion that they had became so much a part of them because of what they did, because of how much they proved themselves and how much they were living in it and part of it. Because it was just so much, it became so much a part of them that it actually became part of the Jewish DNA. And not just that, but it was something that became passed down from generation to generation. Meaning that even a random Jew who didn't grow up with much or grow up with anything had this Ava Misteris in them, which is very important. It's a very important distinction. Sometimes people come to the Rebbe and they would say something like, I want a bracha for my brother who's very far from Judaism. The Rebbe would say, how can a Jew be far from Judaism? If it's a Jew's a Jew, that means he's already in the circle. So we want to bring the clothes closer. Going back to that. Another thing, did any of you see how Rabbi Shestab was doing that whole thing with the 30 letters for 30 days? And then there was this one letter about people who were either from or descendants of people who come out from Russia. Because I think most of the letters were in the 50s. And they were talking about how they were kind of stumbling in the relationship with Judaism. They weren't feeling it so much. And the Rebbe said, what your parents went through, the grit and conviction, I'm kind of paraphrasing the words here, but the grit and conviction that's passed down to you. Then he started saying this whole thing about epigenetics. Epigenetics was someone could experience something that so deeply affects them that it then gets passed on to their children, sort of thing. A lot of times they use it in reference to trauma. It's funny, as he was saying that, I started thinking about this, and then he said it like a minute later. Once he got the first part of the words out, then he said this also. He said, I wonder if this is epigenetics. Then he's like, this probably is epigenetics. To say that the Avos, the love of God that they had, and their service and dedication to God was so much a part of them, and it was so much, it was so great, vastly beyond, I don't know if we could fully comprehend it, but if somebody became part of them, they actually passed it on to their descendants. That way, anybody who's either part of the tribe or comes into the tribe, this is not part of it. This Ava Mitzvot is part of it. No, the Avos did not have the Ava Mitzvot within them. The Avos, their love of God was so complete and so much, so ingrained within them that it became an Ava Mitzvot. Calling it Ava Mitzvot because it's something deep within our DNA that's not always revealed. The whole thing like, sometimes you don't know what you're capable of until you're faced with blah, blah, blah. That's kind of what this is. You don't even realize that you have a pilot light for love of God within you until you might actually be forced to bring it out. Oh, the Merkava is the example that we give to show how deep their love of God was. They say, oh, the Avos loved God very much. Well, that's nice. They were so committed to him that they weren't even like their own bodies anymore. They were just a chariot to God's will. I am yours and tell me where to go. Not out of a sense of smallness of their stature, but out of a sense of submission to God. Now, the first step to accessing it is knowing that it's there. And it's also important because when we're talking, I'm like, oh, you have to have a deep love of God to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, but I don't feel it. Where am I supposed to get it from? So here, though, we're talking about love of God. And we're saying you don't even have to create the love. You have a pilot light. You just have to know how to turn it up. So we're going to start. We're going to start on the journey on figuring out how to get there. So number one, it's in your DNA, right? You don't have to create a skill. You don't have to create something that you don't have already. You have it. There's a story that someone came to the Tzemach Tzedek and he said, I only have 30 minutes a day for Torah studies. What should I focus on? But the Tzemach Tzedek tells him that you should study Chassidus. And the man's like, really? You should not be studying halacha or parsha. Why am I focusing on Chassidus? Tzemach Tzedek said, you're going to study a half hour of Chassidus, then you're going to learn, and you're going to come to know that you really have more than a half hour a day for studying Torah. Study Chassidus long enough, and then you realize that, like, what am I chasing after in this world? What is really important? You're going to be able to focus on what Judaism is all about. So here we're going to deal with the whole love thing here. We're going to figure out what is this all really about. So, describing it further, Ava Mitzvot, where does it go? Where is it located? Especially because you say everybody has it. Well, how do I know? Maybe because my upbringing or this, that, whatever, maybe I've doused the pilot light. Maybe I've done X, Y, and Z that I can't access it anymore. Maybe it's become corrupted. Maybe it's been blocking, tainted, tarnished. The first thing you have to know is that it's in the place of Chachma. Chachma being a das, and then we have the 7 emotive attributes. So it's in a place of Chachma. Why Chachma? This is chapter 3 to this. Chachma is Kochma, power of what? The faculty of the unknown. What is it? It's the ultimate source of knowledge. Something that's above the comprehension and intellect. That's where faith that is above comprehension exists. What do we mean by that? You have Chachma, Bina, Das. So your first one is Chachma, then Bina, then Das. Chachma is the spark of knowledge. It's the original inspiration for an idea. Bina is the understanding of that idea, the flushing out of it. Chachma is a place without ego. Kochma, what is this? When I say what, I'm opening myself up to knowledge with that. Imagine the moment if you could stand at the foot of the most massive library in the world. There's no sense of I in that moment. There's just a sense of smallness between the vastness of all the knowledge that exists in the world. Chachma, you have to be able to put yourself aside to be open to an idea, to be open to a spark of knowledge. With writer's block, they're like, get out of your own head, go do something mundane, and then when your mind relaxes enough, an idea comes to you. Go wash the dishes, go for a walk, go for something like that. Because what's wrong? You're too much in your own head. You have to do something to get yourself out of your head. Do something that's manually stimulating or active and keep your mind free, and then ideas will come. Because Chachma is a place that's beyond the intellect. As far as Bina, the understanding. In the Bina stage, that's where my own background, capacities, all that sort of stuff, that's where they all come into play. You could give every single person the same idea. Here, let me tell you about an elephant. And all of a sudden, we all have different ideas about it. Why do we not all think the same thing? We're talking about an elephant. Why are our thoughts all different now? Well, because we're all different people. And when you say elephant, we're just going to think differently about elephant. It can all be true. Why do we not all think the same thing? Well, because our individual beinas is where an idea starts to take new forms. It's where it starts to change, because our comprehension, our intellects are all different. So the Ava Mesoteres is in Chachma, which is beyond that. It's a place beyond ego. As in, it's a place beyond what I can do to it, basically. Which is also a place that's untouched by negative forces. Why is that? Because Klipa and Sitra Achra, by definition, they're yeshus, they're I am. The more that something considers itself an identity, the less unified with holiness it can be. Because the whole thing with holiness is the submission. Bittul, the submission to godliness. It's the Merkava, saying, you're God and I'm going to do whatever you want. It doesn't matter what I want or what I'm thinking or what I understand. Well, you tell me, that's what I'm going to do. Not because we became doormats all of a sudden. We're fully functioning human beings. We could be high up ranking people or anything like that. Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was so humble. Why was he so humble? How could he be so humble? He was Moshe Rabbeinu. Because he understood that it wasn't his own powers making him who he was. He was totally given over to God. So Chachma is that kind of place. The place that's beyond ego. Bina is a place where there is ego. A place of sense of self. So Klipa and Sitra Achra, their whole thing is a sense of self. Because Klipa and Sitra Achra, that obscure godliness, or can act God forbid counter to godliness, you cannot do that if you're given over to godliness. At the end of this 18 to 25 section, we're going to get more into Klipa and Sitra Achra, but the basic idea of them is that they feel like an I am. There's God and then there's also me, which is why they can't get into Chachma, because Chachma is a place of no ego, and Klipa and Sitra Achra have ego, which means that this hidden love that's in Chachma remains pure and untouched. So what we're making the point for right now is, you tell me that I have it. Well, how do I know? Maybe I didn't grow up maybe in a holy home. So how do I know I still have it? Maybe my fire went out. Maybe who knows what could have happened. Maybe I came from a whole line of who knows what. And maybe we re-altered the DNA, God forbid. So first of all, this is a DNA that's beyond our own little altering. Second of all, it's still there. Well, maybe I tainted it. Maybe I've tarnished it. Maybe I've done something to it. There's some sort of perversion that could have occurred to it. We know that can happen to us. We have this whole thing already with our souls, and if we want to cleanse it and to go through a cleansing process, maybe my Ava Mesoteres needs to go through a cleansing process before I can use it. Now, the Rebbe was telling us, this Ava Mesoteres, this hidden love that you have, is in a place that is beyond. You can't mess it up. It's innate. It's part of you. Where is it? It's in this place of Chachma. How can you say that nothing can touch Chachma? Because Chachma is a place without ego. It's a place without a sense of self. Of the 10 soul powers, Chachma is the highest. Now that we see from the intellectual soul powers, Chachma is the highest. It goes above Bina and above Das. Chachma is just an openness to an idea. It's an epiphany moment. It's a spark of an idea. Bina depends on your intellectual capacities. Bina depends on how smart you were born to be. Bina depends on what you've got going for you, how much you've developed your mind as a muscle and all that sort of stuff. Chachma has nothing to do with it. Anybody can have a good epiphany if you're open to it. It's beyond Bina. It's beyond my own individual intellectual capacities. And because of that, we can't mess it up. In other words, even the negative forces of the world cannot get there, because by definition, the negative forces of the world have ego. They have a sense of self. And Chachma is a place without sense of self. So the only way they could get there is by shedding a sense of self, and shedding a sense of self is bittul. It's holiness. It is not anymore the negative forces. But that's a thing in general. Connecting to God, etc. is making your own sense of self less. Kedusha is defined by being submissive to God, egoless. As a general rule of what is holy is something that is given over to God. The basic idea is, because the more self I am, the more I assert myself as a self, the less I am submissive to God. The more it allows me to say, there's what you have planned, and then there's what I want to do right now. Me just saying, God, what do you want me to do? I'm your humble servant. What do you want me to do? That's bittul. That's self-nullification. Putting aside the sense of self. The ego easing God out. Yes. When I'm specifically talking about arrogance, when we talk about ego, that's definitely part of it. Arrogance is the ultimate version of it. But just as a general thing, the more self I am, the less selfless I can be. The more that I'm aware of me, and I'm feeling me, and I'm worried about me, the less space I have for what's not me. That's why some of the greatest acts we celebrate is the moment of selflessness. If someone jumps into a pool or something to save somebody, especially if they're clothed or whatever, that's selfless. I'm not paying attention to me right now. It's about you right now. We might not be that all the time. It's a big deal when somebody does that. There's enough people these days that just whip out a cell phone and be like, oh, what's happening? Well, that's not very helpful now, is it? But even aside from that, selfless means I'm not making consideration. Someone's drowning, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to save them. You can't do that if you're worried about yourself. You have to push yourself aside to be able to do that. You have to push yourself, your sense of self aside to be selfless. It's not a rejection of the fact that I'm a human being with my own capacities and capabilities, etc. It's saying that even though I'm a human being with my own capacities and capabilities, etc., I'm not calling the shots. I was given all this Well, finish the sentence. All that I have been created with and to be is a means to an end. What do you want me to do with what you've given me? That's bittul. That's nullification of self. Not a denial. If you're very good at something, embrace it. Be good at that. Oh, how do I know that's not whatever? Well, because what are you using it for? Who are you thanking for the fact you have it? That's kind of a little bit of a Tanya. Oh my God, society today is absolutely a narcissistic society. Look what's going on. People do not stop thinking about themselves. Okay, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'll just kind of mention it here because I asked the high schoolers to see, but I don't know that they can truly appreciate the question. One of the thought questions I gave them was, what comes first, your values or your family and friends? It was interesting. From the older class, I got values a little bit more. The younger class was much more, well, it depends, whatever. It does kind of depend, but especially all of us, once we've actually lived in the world a little bit, we realize it's a real question that has to be asked. When do you just go along with it, and when do you actually have to put your foot down? Especially because we understand much more what it can do to a relationship to put your foot down by certain things. If I actually do this, is that an endorsement of it, or is that just me not making a mess of things? And is it worth it? A lot of times people will ask the Mashpia, the Rebbe, about those kinds of questions. They're not always simple questions to ask. It's much easier to answer that question like the broader society thing. Sometimes when we have it, if someone, their kid gets engaged, God forbid they get engaged like a non-Jew or something. You see my kids grow up and you guys are close to us, how can you not come to the wedding? They get hurt and they get upset. It's understandable in the sense of we want our people to be at this wedding. But at the same time, you are asking me to transgress on my values, and what am I if not my values? How can you believe what I teach you when you ask me to now modify what I declare as truth because your feelings right now? There's hurt that occurs because of it. A lot of times they don't see the hurt from our side. Of course I want to be there, but what you're asking me, I cannot be there. How do you not have respect for my values? And I don't want to make this about me right now. You were so concerned about whatever, like you didn't even think about what you were asking me to compromise on. Why did I get started on that? Where did that come from? Whatever it is. But it's important. It becomes like a very uncomfortable question to have to ask. Oh yeah, because it started off with the narcissism. But it also wasn't my decision. Torah says this. That's also why it's like you're not asking me to make a personal moral decision. This is a Torah decision. So yes, society today is definitely antithetical to it. I think Y.Y. Jacobson was talking about it. I'm not sure where I heard this from. Because sometimes I'll listen to lectures and I catch pieces of it and that's what stays in my mind. I don't remember where I heard things from, which isn't great because you want to give credit where you heard it. I think it's him. Like this whole thing about how the pursuit of happiness is the worst thing that happened to society. Because happiness as an end unto itself means that I can do anything if it makes me happy. It basically opens the door to all sorts of behavior. Instead of saying that happiness is a means unto an end, happiness is part of the journey, but like, no, me being happy is all that matters. That creates the narcissistic society. Are you happy right now? That is the only thing that matters. This makes you happy? Fine, you could do it. No, that's nonsense. If it's all about your happiness, who am I to say? Also, if this makes you unhappy right now, then I'll say I can't engage in this behavior. We're a totally narcissistic society. It's terrible. Look at what it's crumbling. People are unhappy because they're narcissistic. They're not happy people, they're empty. So that's just sad. It's very unfortunate. And then you see sometimes also in the younger generation, especially in our own communities, where you see them being influenced by this kind of stuff, and you're like, what are you running for? They don't have answers. They're empty people. We have the answers. But you can't tell it to them because the teenagers don't want to listen to you. There's some of it they have to kind of discover on their own a little bit. You just hope that they don't hurt themselves too much along the way. A lot of what Tanya's going to get to is where we put like emphasis on and why is happiness or fear and love and that kind of stuff, like why are they important and what they lead to. So I guess we'll come to a lot of it. You're more likely to have that way of thinking, I think, when you're grounded in Torah and Mitzvot as a general idea. And then Chassidus gives us a certain lens to look at Torah and Mitzvot through. And a lot of what Chassidus is making the self smaller. That would help facilitate that kind of thinking. Not that nobody else thinks like that, but it automatically opens up to that kind of thinking. I know that's a half answer, but I think we'll get to some of it. Anyways, back to this. The point is that this Ava Mitzvot is in this place of Chachma, which is untouched. So first of all, your pilot light did not go out. It might be a little bit harder to get to, but it didn't go out. It's still there. None of that, it's not tainted. You haven't done anything to it, even if your behavior hasn't always been exactly lined up the way it should be. Don't worry about it, you got it, it's still there. The Alter Rebbe makes a very bold or deep assertion here, where it says, L'chein kol Yisrael, heim ma'aminim b'Hashem, she'emunah hi l'mala min hadas v'hasaga. Every single Jewish person is a believer, basically. Anachnu ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. We're all believers. Whether or not we're attuned to it is something else. Why? Because there's a level of faith that's above knowledge and understanding. With that, though, we have Pesi yamin l'chol davar v'am yavin la'ashuro. The fool believes everything, but the clever man understands. What that means by it is that when it says a fool believes everything, it means that even things that could be understood, he's just going to take it all on belief. And that's considered foolish. There are things that we're supposed to try to understand. There are ways to engage the intellect. There are things we're never going to understand about God because no one can fully comprehend God. Torah and Mitzvot are so much beyond, but there is a lot that we can understand. There is a level of understanding we could reach. When someone just, well, God said so, so everything is, there's no learning involved in any of it, he's considered a fool. We say the clever person understands, he learns as much as he can, and then he comes to a point where he says, and now is where faith comes in. I have learned as much as I can, or I know that this is how much human intellect could comprehend, and then faith comes in above that. And that's what we have here. This is from Tehillim. And foolish and know not, I was a beast before you, yet I'm continuing with you. As in, because I approach you as a fool and a beast, as in, because I stand before God as like a foolish person, as in, because I come sometimes with the irrational power of faith, precisely thereby am I constantly with you. Because I know that there's a point that is beyond my own intellectual comprehension. There's a part that's beyond my own understanding. Through this level of faith that comes here, this is how I stay attached to you. This is a massive declaration, a very important declaration that the Alter Rebbe makes. That we see that even a Kal Shabakalim, even the sinners, the simpletons, people who don't know, even them can reach a level of Mesiras Nefesh when it comes to Kiddush Hashem. How could someone unlearned and simple reach a level of Mesiras Nefesh? How can they reach it? They don't know. They have no full comprehension of the greatness of God. They don't even know what they're giving up their life for. Where does that come from? Where does that impetus and drive come from? Will they say, no, I will not denounce Judaism. No, I will not curse God. No, I will not do the thing. Where does it come from? So the Alter Rebbe says that's their Ava Mitzvot. That comes from a place deep inside themselves that because it's in this place of Chachma and it cannot be tainted and it's so much ingrained and so much a part of their DNA, there is this moment where spiritual adrenaline kicks in. The Ava Mitzvot kind of flames up. The woman who lifted the car off the baby. They say that at moments like that there's superhuman strength that could come in that kind of moment of crises. So this is a spiritual counterpart for it. And the Alter Rebbe says that because we have this Ava Mitzvot that's inside of us and is part of our DNA, where did it come from? It came from the Avos. That means that even in a moment where, God forbid, if Judaism, spiritual life is threatened, Judaism is threatened, denounce God or Judaism or anything like that, even someone who doesn't know, even they can have a moment of the Mesiras Nefesh. A moment where their self is totally put aside and this Ava Mitzvot, since the level of Chachma, flames up and flares up and will not let them cross the line. Specifically because it's beyond intellect. It makes no sense. It's at that level of faith that's beyond sense and understanding. This is the first part, and then the next chapter will finish off the next part of explaining this album starts and where it comes from. That's basically what it is. The Alter Rebbe is bringing this pasuk to solidify and underline that there's a level of faith beyond knowledge and understanding. And where does it come from that a person recognizes their own crassness and their own foolishness, or however great they could be, but at the end of the day, we're physical beings. Physical beings compared to a spiritual being is so crass. It's so physical. No matter how smart or wise they are, right? You could have Tillem's mainly David HaMelech wrote this. So we're not talking about a random person who just came up with a magnet phrase. Even someone like David HaMelech can say that there's a point that when I stand before you like this, and I realize my own crassness, my own lowliness, which is something that's above knowledge and understanding. It's part of faith, which you believe in something, you can't always necessarily explain it. Because there's a point that goes beyond explanation, which is part of what the nature of faith and belief is. There comes a point which the jump, the leap, to say, you know what, I believe in you. Why? I have the sense, I do. You can't always explain it. You can't always explain why. I have this sense within me. Using this analogy of saying that when I stand before you, recognizing my own lowliness, basically, and I know that you're so far above me, totally cannot understand you or anything like that. So when I come before you with this faith that goes beyond all that, this is what allows me to stay close with you. This is what connects me to you. That's chapter 18.